My name is Kyle. I'm the CEO here at Reviewer. We actually built a platform of our own frustrations as part of review committee members, very, very actively involved working with mission-driven organizations from a volunteer perspective as part of the reading or the selection committee. So everything from, entrepreneurship innovation programs, scholarships, grant making, everything kind of in between. And back in about 2012, if you can imagine, platforms like us didn't exist. So the entire scholarship provider space was done through 3-ring binders and manual physical paper. So as review committee members, we were having binders mailed to our doorstep, hundreds and hundreds of pages of scholarship applications, and we were tasked with handwriting notes and feedback and scores and sharing it back with the applicants, et cetera. And then over time, you start to see this online transition. And that's when organizations attempted to use online tools to streamline the operations. So spreadsheets, emails, downloading of documents, online web forms, maybe a lot of tools that you might find yourselves kind of currently using. And as a volunteer perspective, what we started to hear is that it actually created more work because at least with the physical binders and paper, everything was centralized in one hub. Now we're using like 9 different platforms, none of which are intended for actual scholarship management. A whole bunch of resources and other kind of webinars we've done on that if you're interested. But then we started to hear these absolute horror stories. Everything from I have review committee members who are making unfair and biased decisions based off of applicants' backgrounds or demographic details or personal biases with who they know. Potentially the data wasn't being blinded from them. We started to hear these horror stories of scholarship applicants who would apply via email with a bunch of attachments, and they went to spam filter. So actual review teams and committees sat down to go through judging and selection processes, awarded scholarship funding, and then months later, they found out that there were a handful of kids in that use case that didn't get included in the selection. So these are the types of experiences that kept popping up that we kept hearing that led us down, again, this kind of warpath and make sure this can never, ever happen again by building an online platform that kind of serves 2 main purposes. One, from an operational side of things, as a mission-driven organization, how do we ensure that you're allocating your time and energy against high-impact activities and not getting bogged down in the minute details of spreadsheets, downloading documents, emails, etc. But equally important, if not more important, is going to be the experience. And that's for the applicants, the board members, the volunteers, the stakeholders, everybody else who's involved. And so that's kind of where Reviewer came from. Today we work with thousands of organizations, powering scholarships of all different shapes and sizes. The reason why I give that long-winded introduction is that we are at the very forefront of scholarship providers and making, and we're hearing from all of these different industry leaders as well as partners in the space who are kind of running into this kind of roadblock of, okay, well, now we're in 2024, and now we're being presented with these challenges called AI that we've never seen before as a scholarship provider. We've got applicants who are creating complete scholarship applications from scratch, leveraging those tools. We're also starting to hear things like, how do I just let AI make decisions for me, right? Those are 2 very deep ends of the spectrum. And so we have our ear very close to the ground, listening to people like yourselves about, in a perfect world, like, what does this look like? Like, where can we assist? And then we are, making it our mission to make sure we can provide you those tools. So with that said, let's kind of jump into where I kind of feel like right now, where we sit within this space. And again, this has changed very dramatically over the last 18 months. So right now, we're basically right here at the very, very beginning. I could have made this into like an iceberg, right? Or we're just at the very, very tip of, I think, where we're going to go. If we had a ballpark, talking with some of our clients, we're finding that like 70% of essays for scholarships at this point in time are being assisted with tools like ChatGPT. So a very overwhelming number of applications. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? It's how are they leveraging tools like ChatGPT to assist with their success? Is it creating the framework and the groundwork of a quality scholarship application that brings out the best of those candidates, or is it writing it for them from scratch? So that's kind of where we see the space right now. Now, where do we fit within this puzzle? As you can see, we're a bit further along that path, right? So we already have a lot of the tools and infrastructure in place to create operational efficiencies for you and your team. But now on top of that is how do we start to address kind of this ugly little red piece at the bottom of are people actually applying from scratch with AI tools, and how do we empower you to have the data to make informed decisions? And it's not just AI detection. It's also very heavily involved with like plagiarism detection and the work of other people. So that's kind of where we currently sit and where our mission is driven against. On top of that, I did add on here that I think the future for scholarship providers will be autonomous scholarship management and selection. Now, how quickly do we get there? Where is my involvement or where is reviewers' involvement? I don't know. This is going to be a very polarizing topic and discussion. I'd love to hear people's thoughts and feedback on that. But I do think it's inevitable that that's going to be part of the future. It might be next year, it might be 10 years from now. We don't know. But how do we work together as industry partners and peers to kind of baby step work our way up that ladder? So I mentioned a little bit ago that I think right now we're at the very forefront of like people leveraging tools like ChatGPT to create their scholarship applications for them. So what does that look like? And I want to show you how actually easy it is. So while I'm kind of talking in the background, in about 30 seconds, you're going to see somebody taking an actual application form. So it's about a 6 or 7 question essays. I know the application has much more than that. They built a Google Doc that basically said, hey, my name is Kyle. Here's my information. Here's my background. Now act of me and answer these questions in less than 3,000 characters, including spaces. And as you can see, ChatGPT just published a bunch of content for them that they're now copying and pasting right into the application form. So it's really that simple. And if you took the time to read through what's being submitted here, one of the questions was, what book have you read that has inspired you as your kind of career journey? And it talks about The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. It's a book that I probably imagine most of us have never even heard of, but that scholarship content is so well written that how do you as a program operations manager start to differentiate the content being submitted by normal people or by AI? It's shocking that right now we're seeing well over 70% of people using this. So is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It's a bad thing to show what I just did, where they just completely copy and pasted it. But is it a bad thing to start to leverage those tools? So keep this in the back of your mind. I do want to come full circle back to this. Again, I'm going to ask a quick question in the chat of, for those of you who are keeping an eye on scholarships being written with the assistance of tools like ChatGPT, are you starting to identify that? Are those things that you are seeing? Are those things that you're concerned about? So leave that in the back of your mind. I'm going to keep progressing on. I do want to talk about more of like the AI assistance when it comes to like creating content and providing operational efficiencies. And then we'll come back to this here in just a little bit. So with that said, the first thing I want to look at is what I call intelligent automation. And this is very specific to the applicants who are applying to your scholarship program. And this is where the conversation gets really fun, because I almost ask the question, are we setting our applicants up for failure by empowering them to use tools like ChatGPT and or even Grammarly to check on their grammar or their content or their spelling or make recommendations of how to structure an essay, even though they're filling out 90% of it? Is that 10% that they leverage tools going to make them flag them in the future? So those are kind of the questions that we have to start asking ourselves. What I will say, though, is at Reviewer, there's kind of 3 core capabilities that we want to see happening within the application side of things. This is going to be very different for every one of you on the call, depending on the size and scope of your scholarship. So what I will say is, number one, and this is out of order, is that we want to create a personalized experience for our scholarship applicants, right? And when they're filling out their scholarship submissions and their applications, we're collecting content from them that we can then leverage to cater the future experience based on what they inputted to us, right? So for example, if I apply to the Lennox Wilder Scholarship, it's very, very common that I might have a completely different set of questions that are relevant to me than if I would have chose, the Bobby Marlowe Scholarship. It's also very common that, maybe I want to go off on a different kind of career path or a different career journey than somebody else. And if we know that as they're kind of filling out their application questions, we can start to kind of serve them up content that's relevant to their journeys. Maybe we can get into the review and selection side of things. We can start to pair them up with scholarship opportunities that are relevant to them. One great example I have, and I'll show you this, is that we work with a scholarship provider that does about 96 different types of scholarships. And a large percentage of them are either A, donor sponsored, or B, they have such hyper-specific criteria. I went to a very specific elementary school. I want to follow a very specific career path. And then once I graduate, this is exactly what I want to do. So of those 96 scholarships, maybe only 3 of them the applicant is even qualified for. So two things come into play. As an applicant, do I even know which of those three I'm even eligible to apply for? Are there opportunities or there are scholarships that are going unfunded that I'm not even aware of? Or B, am I just applying to absolutely everything, hoping that I can kind of get something down the road? And if that is the case, how do you, as an operations person, start to identify who they are and make informed decisions and kind of vet them quickly and not waste both your time because they're not eligible, or B, waste the applicant's time filling out pages upon pages of scholarship applications if they're not going to be eligible for it? So that's what I mean by kind of creating these custom and personalized experiences for the applicants. On top of that, it's very common that we see organizations start to leverage data being captured in the application structure to influence the decision-making matrix. So, for example, if you have a scholarship, and this is from another webinar, we don't feel that scholarship providers should be basing all the criteria off of academics and achievements that front. It should be a combination of academics, community impact, as well as kind of personal storytelling, which is again why this is so important, because once you start to intertwine AI with personal storytelling, where do you start to draw that line? But if you are starting to say, okay, for example, anybody who has higher than a certain GPA or within a certain bracket of GPA is going to get automatically allocated a certain number of points. Or if they have a certain number of volunteer hours, they're going to be allocated a certain number of points. And you want that to happen automatically on the fly. That way you and your team and or the review committees aren't reading the applications, trying to tabulate it themselves and kind of figure out like what points they should get based off of those. We can basically, create these types of criteria or these learning models that says, hey, okay, this is the makeup or demographic of what we want to see within a scholarship applicant. Now start to assign point values as they hit those different kind of key metrics in the application form. So with that said, what does that look like? So I'm going to kind of go ahead and try to switch windows here just a little bit to kind of showcase how we're seeing this happen. By no means is today's meeting meant to showcase reviewer, although I am going to show you kind of wingman and get some feedback. The goal is to kind of figure out like how is this what does this look like in real time? So as an applicant, I'm being presented with a series of questions that says, hey, look, here's our scholarship opportunity. You have kind of two different paths you can go down. Do you want to kind of pick from a list of scholarships that you want to apply to, or do you want to leverage the recommendation tool that will make recommendations based off of how you interact with the system? So if they chose the latter, they're basically going to fill out a series of questions. And this is actually a real example happening for a scholarship provider that has, roughly 90,000 students within their system. But the applicants come in, they fill out a series of questions, yeses and nos. Again, this is a very basic example. It can be quite robust, right? But the system is basically in real time reading and crunching these answers and these numbers. And then as they proceed on, kind of one of two things or a combination of both can happen. It can say, hey, you know what? Based off of what you just put into the system, here's the 3 different scholarships that we think that you should apply for. Again, what's amazing about this is that I, as an applicant coming into this, may not even been aware that the Lennox Wilder Scholarship was even an opportunity for me. And in fact, there was only 3 other applicants who applied to it. So I'm a very, very strong candidate. And you may have just changed somebody's life by making this opportunity available to them they were no longer, or they were previously not aware of. Number 2 is maybe that none of those questions I answered made me eligible. Like there was a very clear, specific criteria, such as, I was born before a certain year, or I don't want to pursue a certain career path. The system can actually stop them in their tracks and say, hey, look, and it'll actually read and tell them exactly why they weren't eligible. So I know it seems like kind of user-friendly, which is a great thing, but on the back end, there's so many kind of powerful automations that are happening in place. We're adding labels to these people, et cetera. On top of that, I mentioned kind of creating a custom experience for the applicant. So in this use case, me as the scholarship applicant, I chose the Lennox Wilder Family Scholarship. And so based off of the choice that I filled out, the system is now asking me for a very dedicated series of questions that are only relevant to the Wilder Family Scholarship Fund and no other opportunities. Now, a little teaser and foreshadowing, on the back end, we're starting to create these buckets, right? And so I have all these applicants who chose the Lennox Wilder Family Scholarship who are being kind of categorized together. We can leverage AI and automation to pair them up with dedicated staff who we feel are the right people to review them. We have a queuing system, all these kind of powerful things that are happening, but everybody from an applicant's perspective or an operations perspective doesn't need to worry about it. It's just happening in real time on its own. So again, the goal here is 2 parts. One is how do we save a significant amount of operational time? But two is how do we just elevate the experience for the applicant? How do we empower them to focus on the content creation and getting the most out of this opportunity? On top of that, we can also start to explore some of the AI assisted content creation. Again, very polarizing topic here, but how do we start to things like Grammarly, allow them to kind of have the framework created for them, spelling updates, things like that. Again, we want to equip our applicants for success. So again, any questions on any of that, please do toss them into the chat, and we will keep on going here. So the second thing I want to talk about is kind of what I just previewed for you is the enhanced content creation. Again, there's a very slippery slope of how deep you want to go here, but I see this happening in two very key critical areas. So number one is that we want to lower the barrier for applicants to do two things. One is we want to increase application rates, and two, it's our obligation to position everyone, including them, for success. So how do we do that? So number one is that we want to empower them, not empower duplication. So what I mean by that is starting to leverage tools that will come up with ideation generation. So for example, if you have an essay question that was going back to the very beginning of the conversation, what book has impacted you the most? I could say something along the lines of, I'm a huge fan of the book Walter Mitty. Here's the 4 key areas that I think it's impacted me, and then let the systems kind of start to offer some insights what to elaborate more on it, right? So it's the ideation creation, but the applicants adding their own flair to it, so their personality shining through. Or what if you went this route? What if you let the tool start to do ideation generation, but then the applicants answer in a video format? So now we know for a fact that they are coming up with the content because they're video presenting it to you, right? So we're kind of bridging the gap of both worlds, and we're letting their personality shine through. So we're creating the framework for personalization. Number two is we want to even the playing field, right? And so if that is the case, we want to make sure that we make all the tools available to everybody because they're going to go off and use them anyway. So if that is the case, how do we kind of put them into a controlled environment? And then on top of that, I think one of the most impactful ways that we can start to leverage AI and tools is mock interviews, right? And it depends on the demographic of your applicants, but many of them may actually be attending school or college for the very first time. They may have a very small resource or support system around them. And so, great, they went through the application process, they got selected for the interview phase. How do we equip them for success at that opportunity? And so allowing them to kind of have mock interview questions, they can respond back based off of the responses. We can kind of modify the prompts and the follow-ups that they might be getting. That way we're kind of equipping them for better success as they enter the interview phase with the support system that they may not have previously had. Okay, so again, with that said, now I want to kind of jump into, I think, the nuts and bolts of today's conversation. This is where again, the industry's first and kind of our first kind of toes into AI, which is going to be called Wingman. And that's going to be how do we start to detect both AI and plagiarism assistance within the scholarship application structure. So do you remember this example earlier on, right? So we had, these series of questions and prompts that we're feeding into Chat GPT, and within 30 seconds, it's spitting out actual essays that we're going to copy and paste over to our application form. So this is 100% happening right now. It's likely impacting every single one of you on the phone. And if you don't think it is, you're probably missing it. So what do we need to do, or how do we start to combat this? So there's a slippery slope that we can kind of go down. And number one is it's going to be how do we start to identify it? So number one is it's AI generated content. It's inevitable and it's going to be promoted. But how much AI content creation is too much? And I think this is going to be a question for you guys. We'll kind of come back at the bottom of a series of questions. But how much is too much? Is it just creating the framework? Is it the full essay writing? Is any utilization of AI going to be grounds for disqualification? What about plagiarism? On top of that, what are we looking for? Is it going to be essay prompts? Is it a combination of essays and file uploads? Is it just 1 or 2 essays? Is it all of them? And then who are we even checking it on? So some of the things that I want you to think through, and if you want to answer these questions or kind of leave them in the chat, number one is who should you be checking on? You can make the argument that you don't want to do AI detection for every applicant because quite frankly, they're not going to be finalists anyways, right? Even though they used AI to write their essays. And so if that is the case, why don't we just save it for the top 10 before we do interviews? And if we start to flag somebody, we can either make decisions off of it, or we can bring somebody else in to take their spot. On the flip side of things, you also may want to leverage it to help narrow down the list. If you have 100 applicants, we found that 14 of them used 100% AI detection, then don't waste your review committee's time reading those essays when we know for a fact that it wasn't them that wrote that. So I can see kind of both angles there. And then number two is, what is the threshold? And this is a question for you, right? Is it 10% utilization? Is it 20% utilization? What percent utilization was things like grammar assistance and spell checks and framework created? And what percentage of it was, they just copy and paste it, like in our example? And then based off of that, what are we going to do, right? So are we going to completely disqualify them? Are we going to let it fly? Are we going to wait until the results come in? And then on top of that, one last piece is like, how do you want to be checking on these? Is it going to be automated? Is it going to be in real time? Is it a manual review? These are all questions that you need to ask yourselves as well as ask us of how you want to address it, because there's so many things that we can do here. The question that came about the inequities created by candidates who don't have access to AI resources. I think that's exactly where this comes into play, right? You will 100% have somebody coming in here who are using AI tools. And I'm going to go even further than that. They all may have access to a tool like ChatGPT. There's different levels of it. They might pay for it to get higher quality essay writing. But the power behind these AI tools isn't necessarily what you copy and paste into it. It's the follow-up prompts that you ask it, right? So you can have them rewrite content, change things up. You can say, change the voice to now be more like me with this tonality, right? So even though you're still interacting with it, it's still 100% content AI driven. So when I hear the word any inequities or inequality amongst the candidates, I would even go further to say some people are better at using those tools. And so if that is the case, I think that's why you have to have a very clear threshold of like, how much are we going to allow? It might be anything under 20%, which I think personally is probably a very good starting place. The data will tell you if 90 out of 100 of your applicants are at like 60%, okay, maybe that threshold needs to be like a curve that we can move later on. But you have to have kind of that threshold and basically eliminate those inequalities to focus on those that actually put in the time and energy to be authentic in their application forms. So how does that work and what does that look like for you? So again, what I want to do is I want to show you kind of what Wingman looks like here in Reviewer. And this is, again, at a very high level. This will be coming out here in the next, hopefully, month or so. For anybody who's on this webinar and you sign up to kind of preview, you will 100% get locked into the wait list. But the goal here is, again, two parts. Number one is, how do we help you very quickly and easily identify those that leveraged AI or plagiarism assistance? And number two, help you identify how it was utilized so you can make powerful, informed decisions. So what does that look like? So in Reviewer, we have our typical application kind of listing and submission view. On this page, we're going to give you at a glance very quickly what percent of their content was leveraged from both AI and plagiarism, right? And so you can filter from high to low. You can bulk select people. You can do bulk disqualifications from here. You can kind of figure out like, what is that threshold? Okay, in this example, like the average was 14% or 20%. So anything over that will disqualify. Anything under that will let proceed on. So at a glance, we're basically flagging things for you and giving you trends. So you can kind of build out those thresholds. Again, you can then start to filter by these people and say, okay, well, just show me anybody who's greater than 40%, bulk select them, auto disqualify, or vice versa. If you're using this as part of the vetting process, show me anybody under 40% and then advance them on to phase two, right? So high level, quick impact. Number two is we can open up our applicants. So in this example, Leslie, and we can start to drill deep into it. So on a per question basis, and again, this could be a combination of essay prompts, it could be file uploads. This is where we want to work with you to define like what type of checks do you want to see happening, how you want to access it, and what provides you the most impact. We're basically going to be able to show you kind of two interesting pieces of data on a per question basis, what percent was leveraged with tools like ChatGPT or other major players, and then number two, what percent used plagiarism detection. So in this example, I actually have two different essay prompts. One was 100% AI detected, 0% plagiarism, and the other was a flip side of that. It was 0% AI detection and 100% plagiarism. So, okay, great. So I know I have an essay prompt. I can see their answer. I know that it was flagged for some reason. What was that reason? So on a per question basis, I can now open it up. So I press the blue button that said 100% AI detection, and then it shows me the entire, all of the essays that were submitted, including those that had 0%, and it shows them, how much was human context, how much was AI, what the match was, what percentage was, and you can actually physically see what's being flagged here. Now, going back to my other example, if that was plagiarism, you probably want to know, like, was it a false flag or where was it being pulled from? So if I open that up, it'll actually show you exactly what was caught for plagiarism, how much of it was identical, how much of it was paraphrased, what was identified as plagiarism that then was modified to be within their own words, and how likely was it? And then where are these sources, right? So how do we know this? So we can start to show you exactly the content or the article that was pulled from. You can go there, you can read it, you can do your own decisions. So yeah, how accurate are the detector tools? Great question. These are going to be, yeah, very good questions. And those are going to be ever evolving and ever adapting. What I will tell you is that the open source nature of a lot of these AI tools allows us to be able to start to identify trends of human writing abilities, as well as the content being powered through them. The idea here is that we aren't necessarily making decisions on your behalf. All we're doing is saying, hey, this needs to be reviewed. We're flagging this. I'm going to give you an example. There's an organization that we work with in the demographic, and I don't want to give out names or any indicators of who it is, but it's a large group. And the demographic is basically middle school and then early high school age students. And it was an essay-based question or contest. And they had a review team members who were reading through it. They spent hundreds and hundreds of hours. They had thousands of applicants, and they were flagging all these submissions saying, hey, like, I just don't buy that this is written by a fourth grader. And so that made them, so number one is that we're wasting the time of the review committees and the volunteers. And then number two is now these operations and these program teams need to read through all of them and say, you know what, like, I agree, like, in comparison to the other applicants, like, this is on a whole nother level, and it's very clear and obvious. So now they start to reach out to them. Was it the parent that wrote it? Do they use AI, right? So again, nothing here that we're talking about is meant to provide decisions. If I was to go back to our presentation and I had that kind of timeline of like where we currently sit in this AI environment, and I think where we're going, like, that's a slippery slope and there's a long way to go. At some point, is there going to be 100% accuracy on this? Yes. At some point, could you actually do a full-blown scholarship management and selection process using tools? Quite possibly. We're not even close to the way there. So again, the idea here is to start to flag things that say, hey, you know what, this requires human intervention because it's a little bit different than what we would expect. Do with it what you want. Which is another great question that I'm going to kind of go back and ask the team here is like, what is that threshold? Like, what will you do with them? We already have some clients of ours that say if it's 100% detected, they're going to automatically disqualify it, right? So now you start to bring in this, okay, well, are we sure it was 100%? But those are very clear, cut, dry. What you could also do is say this, okay, as a scholarship provider, welcome to our application. If you attended one of our previous webinars, we call this a proof of process, where we'll say, hey, if you're applying to our program, these are the steps that you're going to go through. You're going to fill out this application. You're going to get reviewed by this many people. Your data is going to be blinded. We're going to use this score sheet. Oh, and by the way, we have this really interactive tool that's going to flag you if you start to leverage AI or plagiarize. So don't do it. And so are we already then potentially cutting down on the number of people that are going to use it because we're telling them that we have the tools in place to catch them? So again, it's a great question. I'm glad you brought that up. It's a very dynamic environment. I think is going to change in the next 6 months, change again in the next year. And it's my obligation to you to stay at the forefront of that. The last thing I want to show you here, though, is overarching on a per submission basis, a view that shows you these were all of the questions that we were checking for. Because again, you might have a 50-question scholarship application. Like, we're not going to check every question unless you want to, but I feel like we probably don't need to check things like first name, last name, email. There might be just one essay question or 4 of them, or there might be one essay and one file upload. So we can show you on a per question basis what was checked, that individual question's detection score, as well as the plagiarism score. And then from here, right, you can go ahead and click view on the detection or view on the plagiarism, and then start to open further detail, right, like what was flagged in the content that was within there. So the goal here is that we want to give you the data in multiple different ways and in multiple different formats to make it easy for you to identify and take action on. So With that said, I'm going to keep on going for the sake of time because I do want to answer a ton of questions that might be coming in. But thank you so far for those that asked those questions. Anything additional, please toss them in there. I'm excited to gather your feedback on how you feel like this might impact you or additional areas of opportunity that you'd like to see layered on top of that. There was a question that came in though about an essay from a high school senior, potentially 10 years ago. I was 100% AI driven. I will just kind of preface that by saying that is where the gray area lies. Why I don't feel like currently we can leverage full AI tools to make decisions, not content creation, but decisions. There have been organizations that have reached out to us and they have basically said, look, with your decade of experience running scholarships, you likely have the data that would tell us what a quality candidate looks like to help us auto evaluate or at least rank them. And the answer to that is like, probably we do. But the question is 10 years ago, without tools like Reviewer, was there a bias that might have influenced why that person was selected the way that they were? So now if we're starting to leverage these AI tools, are we basically using a flawed learning mechanism to make those decisions? And my answer to that is most likely. I think over the last year and a half to 2 years, I think we've been at the forefront of this, of ensuring a fair, non-biased, compliant scholarship done the right way with that type of data. You bet, I think we can get there. Anything older than that, though, I'd be very hesitant because I think that the data is flawed, and I'm very impassioned. I think there were biases made with review processes. So yeah, you don't want to use 10-year-old learning models, right, to make informed decisions off of it. Okay, so moving on. The next thing I want to look at is going to be actually 2 parts kind of lumped together. It was streamlining the administrative workflow, but then also number 2 is it's kind of what I just mentioned, which is going to be the fair, non-biased review and selection process. And I think this is why I get really excited because to ensure a fair, non-biased selection as well as properly allocate applicants to review teams, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of steps. And that typically means that it's a big push on your end, which makes you less likely to do it. And I think it's the number one most important thing that we can put into a scholarship program. So how can we help? What does that look like? And what do you need to keep an eye out for? So number one is that I think there's a lot of auto grouping and categorization that we can do. If you remember on the front end, I mentioned that we can start to leverage these types of tools to make a very custom personalized experience for the applicant. Vice versa on the review side of things, we can start to leverage that information to start to load them up and pair them up with other review team members based off of expertise. We can start to identify themes as these applications are coming in. So if you have an essay contest or an essay-based, you can start to create like these buckets of like similar styled essays. Maybe you have applications coming in from certain locations or for certain scholarships or different cohorts, right? So how do we take your big overarching application pool and then start to leverage the data, start to kind of break them out into bite-sized buckets that empowers you to have, dedicated review teams, more manageable workflows, better sorting and filtering capabilities, etc. Number 2 is how do we leverage AI tools to summarize applicants for you and your team? It's very common with a scholarship process to take a big number of people and then narrow it down to a smaller number of people. And if that is the case, how do we do so in a timely manner? So if you have, let's just make up a number, 200 scholarship applicants, can we create these summaries of the applicants instead of reading through a 15-page form, drop downs, checkboxes, essays? We basically give you a synopsis of who that applicant is, and that's what's being compared to other candidates, just to narrow it down to the top, say, for example, 50, who then advance a more human interaction and more human touch point. To be very, very clear, if we go this route, the proof of process needs to be at the forefront of your procedures because applicants need to be aware of how they're going to be reviewed. Again, I want to be very critical on that. If you're going to start to leverage AI tools to create summaries and assist with the decision-making process, the applicants need to be aware of it going in. Number 2 on top of that is the pairing up of applicants to judges. Right now there's a lot of blinding and things that we can do to ensure that they're not seeing personal data that make a bias or uninformed decision-making process. I think that we're kind of on a precedent here of being able to do more on top of that. So for example, if there's content being put into like essays or file uploads that might have an identifier, in real time, being able to flag that for you. And the last thing I want to look at is the tabulation of results. So again, we want to make sure that there's no human involvement in the mathematical tabulation of score sheets, but more specifically, and I'm going to pause here, I'm going to show you this, is the normalization of the results. So this is a brand new kind of exciting thing that, again, that we are at the forefront of is, okay, we know for a fact that the characteristics of a compliant, non-biased, well-ran scholarship is the random distribution of scholarship applicants to review teams, and the review teams not looking at all of them because they don't have the mental bandwidth to do so, right? They don't have the time and energy to review 50 to 100 applications. What if you want them to review 4 of them? Right? That means that you're going to have applicants who are being judged by different people, and those people are not going to be the same. So if I, as Kyle, I love the show Shark Tank, Mr. Wonderful is a hard ass. He is going to rank people differently than, say, for example, Mark Cuban. So is that a fair representation of the candidate, or is it a reflection of the reviewer? If Mr. Wonderful never gives out higher than a 15 and he gave you a 13, but Mark gave out a 30, is that a bad thing? No, you have the best score that that judge ever gave. So why should that be included to lower your average? So how do we start to take into consideration judges who are maybe more biased, or sorry, more stringent versus those that might be easier, normalize it so it doesn't matter who judges you, you're being given the opportunity based off of the judge's averages. So we'll look at that next. Thoughts, questions on that, toss them in the chat. We're almost done, then we'll open up for some pretty good Q&A here. So what does this look like? So jumping into the review side of things, number one is that I think it's extremely important for you to gather data about your review team or your review committee. What I mean by that is there might be certain qualities of that individual that make them a better candidate to review certain scholarship applicants. So collect that information, and then we can start to make these kind of learning models where we can say, okay, well, I want every review member that has kind of this demographic or this characteristic to review these applicants. But if we don't know what that is, we can't do that, right? So as we're adding in our review team, we want to start to kind of start the process there. Number two is that categorization concept, right? So we might be able to say, okay, we have all these scholarship applicants, but based off of what they're putting into the submission form, we can put them automatically into like certain type of buckets that match their scholarship, themes of their application, phases of review, etc. So we're taking big numbers of people, we're starting to break them into bite-sized pieces. Going back to how I started this conversation a little bit ago, which would be saying, okay, well, I know for a fact that this demographic of review committee member would be a better fit for those applicants. So again, if you have a scholarship where you have people who are wanting to go to college for engineering versus arts, you might have totally different panels of review committee members. So why don't we start to map them and pair them up based off of that? So we have these buckets that are both full of applicants and then review members. The next piece to this puzzle is, okay, great. I have 150 applicants. I can't have all 3 of them review all 150. That's probably not the right math to use. I can't have my 10 people review all 150 of them. I want them to get a much more bite-sized portion. So number one, I want you to randomize it. And then number two, let's blind it. So what does that look like? We can actually open up these buckets and it'll show us a listing of every applicant we have. It'll show us the number of people who are currently supposed to review it and then who those individuals are. So what we can do at this point is we can bulk select them and say, let's just give every single candidate no more than 6 judges, but no less than 4, or vice versa. Let's give everyone 3. The system takes the applicants, takes the review committees, and just auto divvies it out for you to make it very, very random and fair, lowers the workload capability for the review team while still ensuring that the applicants get the number of reviews and the fair opportunity that they deserve. So then what happens next? Well, number one is you can also override that. So if you find that there is a conflict of interest, or if you find out that they mark a submission as a conflict of interest or they flag it, you can in a real time reassign this back out to somebody else. But then when the review committee comes in, they get this menu that shows them the applicants or the candidates that they need to review. You will notice that the blinding is a critical piece to this. So if you do want to hide demographic details or PII, obviously you can do that. The applicant or the review team opens up the application. Again, you'll notice off to the left that everything that should be blinded is. They can see the essays, they can see the content. Again, maybe you removed an essay completely because it was written with AI, you just left the rest of them. All of this becomes something that we can do. But they get this side by side where they can very easily view the application. They can fill out the score sheet. Again, the beauty of these score sheets is that we want to leverage data to make informed decisions off of. I also feel passionate that we typically don't want to be doing a comparison of one applicant to another. We want to be grading the applicant off of the merits of their content and then letting the results, obviously compare them on its own to the other candidates. So I hate giving judges or review teams like score sheets on a scale of 1 to 5 because they get so bogged down in those numbers. So instead, let's just ask them a series of questions. Is this great? Tell us more about their scholastic achievements. Yeah, it was above average. How was their essay written? It was amazing. And then on top of that, behind the scenes, leveraging point values and scores that will auto allocate points based on what they chose. That builds out these leaderboards. I want to go a step further than that. If one of your criteria is that you want to grade people at a higher level based off of, say, for example, GPA, or probably more specifically volunteer hours, we don't want your judges having to add that up. Okay, well, this person had a 3.2 and 16 volunteer hours, so I got to add this many points, carry the one, divided by 4. Let's just let the system bring that data into the score sheet automatically. So in this example, this judge might have gave us a 29, but it was actually a 24 because we subtract the points automatically based off of those kind of qualities. So again, we're really lowering the barrier here. So then the next piece is that we need to kick out this leaderboard that shows us in real time every single applicant, who reviewed them, totals, averages, etc. So you can leverage this data to make informed decisions off of. Now, I want to pause here because this is critical. And we actually have a beautiful example here. Whereas maybe you're going to give out 3 or 4 different scholarships. And I'm looking here at number 2. I got Sheldon Cooper, who Judge Judy gave it a score of a 31, but Mark gave it a 12. Like, that's a tremendous difference between the two of them. And so that's going to hurt both total and average scores, which in return will influence where Sheldon lies in this ranking tool. This literally might be the difference of receiving a scholarship and changing that person's life or not. What if, in this example, Mark has never given higher than a 13? Should this person be penalized? Absolutely not. In fact, it'd be the best score that person gave. So what do we need to do? So here's an example of kind of what that normalization report looks like in a CSV format, where it shows you every single applicant. And on a per scorecard question, it shows you how each individual judge scored it. So you can start to see some trends right here, where judge number 4 or 5 gave Michael Scott a 5, which is way lower than the rest. What if a 5 is actually a great score? So you'll notice as I scroll right, here's the data for question number 2. Here's the data for question 3, 4, etc. So then we get to this really beautiful graph. And it actually shows you each judge's score on a per applicant basis, but then it also takes that judge and gives you their overall average, right? So I'm going to change this person's name. Let's just pretend this was Judge Judy. So Judge Judy, on average, gives a score of a 32.6. And that's pretty much an alignment here. But as you can see, she gave Leslie a 30, and then she gave James Bond a 35. So if I go off to the right, I have a display score where we actually take averages. So we create a baseline, which is 1. So if the judge gave a 1, that means that is their average score. Anything lower than 1 is a lower score. Anything higher than 1 is a great score. And so in this example, you'll see that this was a 0.91 because it was lower than that judge's average of 32.625. If I go down to James Bond, it's a 1.07 because it's higher than that judge's average. So now we have, instead of mathematical totals and averages, we have these display center scores that are based off of that individual judge's averages. So if I jump to the right, now we have this total average that says, okay, our number 1 candidate is actually Bruce Banner because that person on average scored 1.15 higher than their average judge's average scores, whereas this person up here got a 0.9. So if we were using other data, we'd be able to actually visually tell the difference between a judge who never gets higher than a 15 gets higher than a 1 average because that's their best score. So I know it's kind of confusing. That's a lot to unpack there, but I'm just trying to showcase how we can start to leverage data to call out biases, unfair utilization of score sheets, etc. So with that said, let's jump back over. We got about 10 to 15 minutes. I can stand for as long as you want to start to answer any additional questions that you might have for me. As I'm doing that, again, I want to thank everybody for your time and energy today. I mentioned beforehand that I think that this is going to be, let's see here, a very impactful thing that's happening within the space. More and more AI tools are going to start to pop up. And so how do we at Reviewer help you stay at the forefront of it and build you the tools that you need to be successful? So Long answer. Any questions that you have for me, and or more specifically, any insights that you want to offer about things that you're seeing within the space with AI, things that you want to see, things that would make your lives easier, concerns that you have. I'm going to take all of that, and that's going to both influence what we do here at Reviewer. It'll influence additional webinars. We are on this kind of information gathering journey right now to figure out like what's happening and how can we help you.